This is the Forbes Books Podcast, conversations with remarkable individuals who are impacting the world of business and beyond. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and as the new academic year begins, millions of college students are facing unprecedented challenges and opportunities. The landscape of higher ed has transformed dramatically since many of us went to college, with declining enrollment, rising costs, expanding online options, and the emergence of artificial intelligence. To find out how universities are handling these changes, I decided to look in my backyard. My guest today is Andrew Hsu, the president of the College of Charleston. He's an accomplished leader, a distinguished scholar, and a champion of higher education. Dr. Hsu, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Joe. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, sir. So I want to start by talking about the magic of Charleston. So I've been in the Low Country now for 3 years. I moved down here before it was cool. Dr. Hsu, I moved down here March of 2020, and then all of a sudden all hell broke loose. So my timing was pretty suspect. But the one thing I've noticed, and maybe you did as well when you first came down here, was that no one's from Charleston. They either came here to go to school at the College of Charleston and stayed, or they came for a man or woman and stayed. So what was your relationship to when you came down here and noticed how so many people had gone to your school and just stayed here for the rest of their lives?
Well, I think that's the charm of Charleston, right? So as you mentioned, most of the people here are not from Charleston. And in fact, I think a lot of our students are from the Northeast. And after they went to school here, they fall in love, they stay here, and they also bring their parents. Surprisingly, many of them would move here after their kids graduate. But I want to correct you on one thing. That is, there are actually a lot of people that are from Charleston. And in fact, when I first came, one of our alum who showed us around, he's the 9th generation Charlestonian living in the same house, or he's the 7th generation living in the same house.
Well, as you'll come to find out, Dr. Hsu, I like to exaggerate. So I say most people are not are not from Charleston. But you've worked at many universities, studied all over the world. Have you ever noticed a city like this in the past that, like, once the student goes to the particular school in a city, stay there? And because I know you've studied and taught and we're working in academia across the country, but have you seen this before? Because to me, it's new, because I'll run into someone from University of Michigan or Ohio State, and they'll live in New York, New Jersey, even down in Charleston. But for whatever reason, people seem to stick with this city.
In that sense, it is somewhat unique. If you look at the percentage of students who tend to stay, obviously other universities would brag about that. Same thing. For example, I worked at San Jose State, and at San Jose State always brag about the fact that their students come to San Jose and they stay in Silicon Valley and so forth. But certainly, if you look at the actual numbers, I think a much bigger percentage of our students after graduation would stay here. In fact, I'll tell you a quick story. When I was first interviewing for this job, I was in a Uber, and then there was an elderly gentleman who clearly was retired driving the Uber. I said, are you from local? And he said, no, I'm from Pittsburgh. And I said, well, how did you end up here? He said, well, I have 4 daughters, which resonated with me immediately because I also have 4 daughters. And he said, all 4 of my daughters decided to come from Pittsburgh to study at the College of Charleston, and all 4 of them decided to stay. So he said, after I retire, if I wanted to see my grandchildren, so I was basically forced to move to Charleston.
Well, not a bad place to be forced to live to, as you know, Dr. Hsu. And the one thing that's curious about the whole Southern angle as we've begun this conversation, you're originally from Beijing, studied there. After you graduated college, you came to the South. You went to Georgia Tech, where you got your master's and PhD. What was it about the South that attracted you when you made the leap from China to the States?
Well, actually, at the time, I had not much of a choice, because I came to Georgia Tech because I had an aunt who sponsored me from Atlanta. She lived in Atlanta, and Georgia Tech was the only place I could afford, because I had to, she provided me with room and board and so forth. So that was the only place I could afford. But I'll have to say that I fell in love with the South immediately because, as you probably know, people in the South are just more friendly than perhaps people anywhere in the country.
And in terms of the culture shock, like you said, it was the only place that you could go. But like, what was the culture shock coming from Beijing to just being like outside of Atlanta at Georgia Tech?
Well, at the time, the cultural shock was huge because at the time, China was just beginning to open up and barely open yet. And many people there still were wearing the Mao suit and didn't have much experience with Western culture. And when I came, of course, just the number of choices in ordering a sandwich shocked me. And of course, when I was learning English back in China, at the time, at least, the British English was taught there. And so when I came, I couldn't understand a word of what my professors were saying. They were from Georgia, from Alabama, and Tennessee, and so forth. So.
Oh, that's awesome. And one last thing about this, because you mentioned food. I'm assuming that you are now an expert on Southern barbecue. You spent so much time at Georgia Tech and now 5 years in Charleston. Have you endeared yourself to the Southern cuisine?
Oh, certainly. I love shrimp and grits.
Oh, shrimp and grits, yeah.
Yeah, and then sea crab soup.
Oh, okay.
Is certainly my most favorite food now.
So you're coming up on your 5th anniversary. What's it been like? Because obviously you had to endure a pandemic, a shift sort of in society in terms of like people's relationship to college, the whole student loan thing. Give me a sort of a recap of your 5 years here.
Well, it's been somewhat a wild ride because of the pandemic, but it's certainly a very enjoyable ride, and I absolutely enjoyed every single minute being here. But interestingly enough, when I first came, we had an epidemic of mumps on campus.
Oh, geez.
And that lasted about 5 months, so gave us sort of a preview of what was to come. And we actually honed our emergency management team through that experience.
Wow.
And then, of course, the second week of my first semester here, we had to evacuate for hurricane and send all the students inland and so forth. But we since have improved the college quite a bit, its reputation, its attractiveness, its academic reputation, its attractiveness to students. We are going to welcome the largest freshman class to our campus, and that's due to a very large increase in the number of students interested in us. 5 years ago, we had about 12,000 applications per year, and this for this fall's incoming class, we had about 26,000, close to 27,000 applications.
Unbelievable. And I got to get your take on this because there was a local news story the other day about housing, and we're going to get into housing in a second. But before we do, they interviewed one of the students, and they said that the reason for her, this is the kid saying it, the reason for the College of Charleston's popularity was because of TikTok, which you probably don't agree with that because I'm sure there's more to it. But what is it about the growth? Is it just the magic of Andrew Hsu that you got there and all of a sudden everybody wants to go to the College of Charleston? Or how do you explain this growth over the last 5 years?
Well, certainly I would like to think that there's the magic of Andrew Hsu, but clearly this organization is, we are one of the oldest institutions in the country, right? We're the 13th oldest and certainly the oldest in the South outside of Virginia. It's really a number of things, right? So as you mentioned, since you moved to Charleston, all of a sudden Charleston became the go-to place for many people who either are retiring or simply want to work remotely from a nice area, and everybody is trying to get to Charleston. And I think the College of Charleston certainly ride that wave of popularity and became more popular. But certainly, as an institution, we have done quite a few things. I can name probably 5, 6 different things we were doing to both improve the quality of our education as well as trying to improve the way we serve our students. and improve their experience. And, this one kid who said it's because of TikTok, I would like to think there's probably also some truth to that, because students tend to post their experiences on TikTok and talk about their experience. And speaking from my own experience, my daughter actually picked her college because of watching TikTok videos and so forth. And that does have a major influence on students. And so when most of your students are very happy here and enjoying both the academic life in the classroom as well as outside of the classroom, then all of a sudden you do become very popular. And on top of that, of course, we increase our marketing efforts, our reaching out to not only just graduating high school seniors, but we reach out to high school students in their sophomore and junior year across the country. So that also helped us quite a bit.
And the focus of that story was not about TikTok. It was about the housing crunch that you are all experiencing at the College of Charleston. And for folks not familiar, Charleston is a beautiful little city, but the emphasis on little. There's not a lot of places to live or readily available. So how are you handling it now, this incredible popularity of the school? People got to live somewhere. And I'm sure for most kids, if I was coming into College of Charleston, I would love to live downtown as opposed to living at one of the sort of barrier islands or one of the suburban areas. So how are you handling it in terms of being able to accommodate all these kids that are coming in?
Sure. So first of all, because of our downtown location and the limitations of campus facilities or even facilities around campus, we have to control the number of students that we could admit. And as a result, as you can probably imagine, we became more selective over the last 4-5 years. On the other hand, we're also trying our best to accommodate more students by improving our on-campus facilities. We're trying to partner with some of our local business partners. We're in the process of trying to build more residence halls on campus. And I think the key is to increase our ability to house our students on campus. In fact, I think that's probably also going to help us improve our Allentown relationship, because we can then bring more students back from the neighborhoods and put them on campus.
Awesome. One of the things that's changed over the last few years, and probably during your lifetime, the cost of college. I'm sure you've seen countless stats about the fact that in this century, the cost of going to university has doubled. How do we sort of level the playing field for all folks, that you don't have to have generational wealth? You don't have to have generational wealth to go to college. You can go to college if you're a working class kid. In terms of the inside, from being someone who works in academia, is there a cap to it? Can we slow that down? What do you say when someone brings up the fact of the cost of college?
So sure. So I think public education is the answer. Public universities is the answer to this challenge. And I think if you really look at the cost in absolute dollars, it went up quite a bit. But in terms of constant dollars, in many cases, in-state tuition has not risen for many years. In our case, for example, our in-state tuition did not increase in the last 4 years I've been here, even in absolute dollars. And in constant dollars, the cost actually went down, right, because of inflation. One thing I want to sort of correct that is sort of popular out there is that universities begin to charge more and more. But the fact that universities is charging more and more really is the result of many state governments reducing their support to universities. Nationally, it used to be for public schools, for every $1, the state would pay the university $2 from tax collected. And now I think the average is for every dollar that the student would pay, the state would only give the university 50 cents. Whether in absolute dollars they have reduced or not, but the proportion has changed quite a bit. So in absolute sense, public support to public institutions have reduced. Most public universities are trying very hard to control their costs. I know that's our case, as I mentioned. And we're also trying to provide more need-based scholarships. And I think that's the other way we can make sure that the playing field is leveled for students who wish to get a college education.
Awesome. And you mentioned your daughter picked her college because of TikTok. And I'm a kid of immigrants. My mother was a Cuban refugee. My father was a sailor from Spain. And they always would regale us the stories of immigrants coming to the States and not so much being like, you don't have any idea how lucky you have it, but it was implied. Do you ever have to do that with your kids? The fact that you came from communist China to here, raised a family, they don't have to deal with the same things that you have to deal with. Do you have to do any constant reminders every once in a while about how lucky they are?
I can't say that I have. I had to constantly remind them, but I do that inconspicuously by just telling them the story of what I had experienced when I was their age, and I think they get the message.
And so I have dear friends of mine that their daughter is going to be starting her freshman semester here at the College of Charleston. What sort of advice would you give to an incoming freshman? And I know it's been a long time since you were a freshman at college, Dr. Hsu, but what would you say to the incoming class, which I'm sure you give a message to every year, but for my friend who's their daughter's coming in, first time in college, first time in going to the College of Charleston, how would you prepare them for their first early days?
So I think to the student, I would say that, take advantage of the support we have here, participate in campus life. University or college education is not within the four walls of the classroom. It's really everywhere. It's in the residence halls. It's in the basketball court. When you go see a game, and so, or if you go to your fraternity or sorority activities. So, just be part of the campus life. That probably would be the best way to ensure your success on campus. And for the parents, I think it's just we need them to support their students and also encourage them to seek help when they see the need. Oftentimes on a large campus like ours, we have over 10,000 students. We may or may not notice a student that needs help, but parents often do. And I would simply say to your friend, if you see your student needing help, whether academically or emotionally, please reach out to our faculty and staff, or even reaching out to me to seek help.
Wow, that's great. Well, thank you for that, Dr. Hsu. And lastly, let's talk about the future, because during the pandemic, do you remember the pandemic? It was that thing.
Yeah, that thing.
Yeah, you remember that? There was a push at the time, and actually like corporate America as well, even like the tech companies were like, everything's going to be 100% virtual. No one come back to the office. And then all of a sudden you saw the Googles and Amazons of the world like, remember that thing where we told you about you could stay at home? No, we want you to come in. And there was even some talk about colleges pushing the fully virtual nature of classes. And I think research will come to show us that it's probably not the best. Like you mentioned, the fact that the college is not confined to the four walls of the class, it is everything around it. But what was your take then and now in terms of virtual learning?
Right. So certainly, I think through the pandemic, we're forced to become more comfortable with virtual learning, both our students and our professors. However, we do know through our own studies that virtual learning may not always work, and particularly it may not work for all the students. So if the pandemic taught us anything, it's that we need the human interaction. We need the face-to-face discussion, and that helps us learn better, and that helps us teach better. So I think certainly online education, virtual learning is here to stay, especially with ChatGPT and the like. That's going to only enhance that. But I don't think the brick and mortar university is going anywhere anytime soon, because that's part of human nature is that we need that human interaction.
Good. And you mentioned ChatGPT and AI, and boy, Dr. Hsu, college is a lot different for folks today than when we went. I went in the 90s. You went around the 80s. It's a lot different because now all of a sudden you have the AI element of things to make your life a lot easier. Now that you're going into your first full year of having AI gone mainstream, because it was November of 22 where ChatGPT was introduced. So you kind of had a half year of having to deal with it last year. What do you see as the president in terms of how AI is going to play in education? Because for me, if I was going to college right now, Dr. Hsu, I'd be like, damn, all my work's going to be so much easier. All I got to do is get a few prompts, add a couple of words, hit one button, and all of a sudden my work is done. How are you as president tackling this?
So certainly generative AI, no doubt, is going to change our education. First of all, we need to start rethink what we teach and how we teach in the classroom, because getting the right information, even though now ChatGPT sometimes give you the wrong information, I think at a given time it's going to correct itself, and eventually getting the right information is not going to be an issue. It's how do you interpret the information and how do you use the information, the knowledge is the issue. So how do we teach? In the past, we teach a lot of things by rote learning and pass the knowledge on to the students. In the future, I think that's going to continue to be necessary, but more important is how do you interpret and how do you apply, rather than remembering. How do you remember those knowledge? Yeah. So I think that's the first thing, is what to teach and how to teach needs to really be reimagined. And then, of course, how do we take advantage of AI to better teach and to help students better learn is the next thing that I think we need to really get a handle on. For example, now you really can have personalized learning with generative AI, and everybody could learn at their own pace. And you have personalized tutoring system where if you needed help in writing a computer software, instead of waiting for your teaching assistant or your professor to answer your questions, you could ask a question 3:00 in the morning, and ChatGPT will give you hopefully the right answer. So I think there's just going to be a lot of new things that we have to try to do in higher education.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned it there, and that sort of been a criticism of the education system is our kids aren't really learning; they're memorizing, and so they're memorizing information. They don't know it's not knowledge; it's basically information that they're storing in their brain so they can pass a test. In a way, the advent of AI can sort of revolutionize the way kids are taught, because all of a sudden the information is irrelevant. It's whether they can use that information tangibly.
Right.
So what does that mean on the university front? Does that mean you guys have to invest in new ways of teaching? Is there maybe like kids have to write their reports right there with the teacher sitting there? I mean, how do you even handle all that?
Indeed, those are all the things we're looking into on campus. In fact, this summer, we actually have a faculty committee that looked at those areas that you just mentioned. Certainly, Blue Book might come back, become popular again in the bookstore.
I don't think anyone knows what you're talking about, Dr. Hsu. The Blue Book is that
learn what they are.
It was that crappy little blue book that was smaller than a notebook, and you would fill out your paperwork in class with the professor there. Do you see that? Is that a possibility?
I think that's certainly going to happen for certain type of classes. For example, if you want to teach students to write, to just assign an essay and say, go home and write an essay is no longer going to work, because I would say doesn't matter what the professor says, many of the students are simply going to ask ChatGPT, say, write me this essay. The question is, how do you enforce? And I would think that maybe not Blue Book, but at least, have a laptop and write right there in the classroom could be an option in the future. How do we give out exams and give out homework assignments, all of those will have to be reimagined.
I'm going to ask you a weird question because you grew up in communist China. Can you see universities in the future being able to block AI websites from campus so kids don't have access to these sites? And I know that's sort of, I joke about the communist part of it, but that's what, that's what communist countries do. They block certain
That's
sites.
what they do for the entire country. By the way. So,
could that happen on a university level?
I don't think so, quite honestly. I think it's here to stay, and it doesn't matter how you block it. Students will figure out a way to access it. So I don't think blocking it is the answer.
Okay. All right. And so lastly, Dr. Hsu, we've talked about the magic of Andrew Hsu and the growth that Charleston has had over the last 5 years. So what does the next 5 years look like for you, sir?
So our aspiration that's stated in our the vision statement in our strategic plan is to become a national university with a great academic reputation. So that is where we're moving towards. We'll continue to improve the education our students are getting. We'll continue to improve our student success rate. We'll continue to improve the type of programs we offer to eventually become a national university, which is befitting the current reputation and the footprint.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Hsu, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I apologize because this is probably not your average interview that you usually do. So thank you for humoring some of my questions. I really appreciate it. Maybe one of these days we get together, grab some shrimp and grits, and then talk about generative AI in the future. But I really appreciate the time, Dr. Hsu.
I would love that. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome, and that'll do it for another episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe. That way you'll get new episodes as soon as they're available. And if you have a spare moment, I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave a review, which would help other exceptional entrepreneurs like you discover the show. You can always connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.